Okay, great. Let's pick up in the middle of the 4th chapter. And we're at the 7th Mishnah. We're dealing with monetary matters, but we're going to digress now. In fact, for the rest of the chapter, we're going to digress mainly into questions of calling things by their name. Now, I owe you an apology because yesterday I said we'd do more financial arbitrage, but in fact, what we are going to do generally through the rest of the chapter is to get into questions of calling things by their proper name. And the 7th Mishnah begins by talking about someone who redeems Maaser Sheni. In other words, he hands over money, or he substitutes money for Maaser Sheni, but he doesn't say what he's doing. Hapodeh Maaser Sheni velo kara shem. He redeems Maaser Sheni, but he doesn't call it that by name. And Rabbi Yossi says, that's fine, it's okay. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, tzarich lefaresh. He's got to call it out by name. And the Mishnah brings a parallel example from someone who is speaking to a woman about her divorce or her betrothal. Hayam mudaber im naisha aliske gitin v'kiddushin gita v'kiddusheha, her divorce or her betrothal. V'natan la gita v'kiddusheha, he gives her bill of divorce or her kiddushin. V'lo peresh, he doesn't say harei at mekudeshet or harei, this is your get. He just they've been talking about it, but he just gives it to her. Rabbi Yossi Omer Dayo, exactly the same language. Rabbi Yossi says, that's fine. Rabbi Yehuda says, Sarich lefaresh. Rabbi Yehuda says, you've got to make it explicit. And interestingly, in all of these cases, the halacha goes according to Rabbi Yossi. And we find this, by the way, certainly in the case of Kiddushin, we all find this slightly shocking. In the case of get, well, the get is actually written on a document, so there's no doubt about it. But in the case of Kiddushin, we find this slightly shocking. And I wanted to show you the way that the Rambam expresses the halacha in the Mishneh Torah, in Hilchot Ishut. It's chapter 3, halacha 8. And he paraphrases the Mishnah, but he adds one incredibly important word. Hayam mudaber aishal iskeit kiddushin. So someone is talking to a woman about getting married. Ve'ratzta, and she wanted to. That's the word he adds. Ve'ratzta, and she wants to get married. Ve'amad ve'kidesh v'lo peresh, and he stands up and gives a kiddushin without saying it explicitly. These are kiddushin, and then he goes on to quote the rest of the Mishnah. And actually, he quotes Rabbi Yossi directly. You can see very elegantly, by the way, in this Rambam, how the Rambam quotes the Mishnah. He uses the words of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Dayo. Rabbi Yossi Omer Dayo in the Mishnah, and the Mishneh Torah says, Dayo, ve'eno tzarich lefaresh. Rabbi Yossi says, Dayo. Anyway, so you can see the Rambam is quoting the Mishnah, but he's adding the very important qualification, ve'ratzta, and she wanted to. And it's interesting that one of the principles of Kiddushin is that both parties have to agree and have to be clear. And the Rambam upholds that principle in this halacha, even though he doesn't call for an explicit statement, harei at mekudeshet. If you don't mind, because time is short, I'm going to briefly skip Mishnah 8. We will come back to it, of course. And I just want to look at Mishnah 9, because the Mishnah 9 follows this theme of calling things out. And we're going to see more examples of this later in the chapter. Kol hamad hanimtsaim. If any money found, this is money just found, in the house or on the ground, you can find coins. Nowadays, we mostly keep coins in bank accounts, but then people actually stored physical coins because they didn't have banks. So people are always finding things. Kol hamot hamninsaim, harei elu chulin. They're all considered chulin. They're considered to be just ordinary coins. Even afilu dinars zahav im hakesev im hamad. Even if you find gold dinars with silver and with copper coins, and this might look like someone has accumulated a set of coins of Maaser Sheni. even though afilu dinar zahav im hakesef im hamaot, it's chulin. But the Mishnah goes on to say, matzah b'tuchan cheres. If he found among them a potsherd, and people very often used to write on potsherds in those days, by the way, because paper was not available. Other ways of writing were not really available in those days. You could find a scrap of leather, I guess. But potsherds were incredibly common for making small notes. So the Mishnah goes on, Matzah b'tuchan cheres. He's found a potsherd. V'chatuv alav Maaser, and written on the potsherd is Maaser. Hareze Maaser. This is Maaser. So in other words, sometimes the evidence makes us call something out, and then if we take the evidence. But in general, if you find something which is not called out, it's chulin. Slightly unlike the situation in the first Mishnah we looked at, where you redeem Maaser Sheni without calling it out, and that is a valid redemption. So what happened to Mishnah? What happened to Mishnah 8, which we skipped? Well, Mishnah 8 is an incomprehensible Mishnah. It's a classic example of an incomprehensible Mishnah, and I just didn't want to get bogged down in it. That's why I left it till last. But let's just try and make a little bit of sense of it just in the few minutes that we have available to us. And this Mishnah, it doesn't continue the theme of calling things out, but it goes back to the questions of valuation, which we've been looking at over the last few days. And remember, when we looked at valuation, we said that valuation depends on the locality and on the time. It's always current valuation and current time. So we always deal with, it's very modern in the sense that we deal with, a modern trader would always mark his book to market at up-to-date prices. And the way we deal with Maaser Sheni is always with dealing with up-to-date prices in the locality where the person is. And we're going to find this principle of using up-to-date prices and relevant to the market where the owner is sitting in this Mishnah. So someone has set aside an isar of money as Maaser Sheni. And he must be in Jerusalem, actually, because he's actually eaten half an isar's worth of food. Okay? Or I presume he's in Jerusalem, because he's now going to move, but he's not. He's now going to move. He's going to go somewhere else. But fundion. A fundion is actually two isars. Let's have a look. Here's a table of coins in the Mishnah, which we were looking at about couple of weeks ago. Gold dinar is 8 grams of gold. We said that a seller was 17 grams of silver. An isar is basically a 90. We mentioned that there are 96 isars in a seller. And it's a very small coin, an isar. So this quantity of Maaser Sheni that he set out is a very small quantity. And a pundion is 2 isars, 48 to a seller. Okay, a pundion is 2 isars. Let's just try and keep that in mind as we go back to the Mishnah. So he set aside this isar. He's eaten half that quantity of food. And then he's gone to somewhere else where an isar was worth a pundion. In other words, the market value of the isar seems to have doubled wherever he's going. Maybe there's a squeeze on small change. So what can he do? Ochel alav od isar. He used to have half an isar of food left to eat. Now he's got a whole isar of food left to eat because the isar has just doubled in value. And it works the other way too. Someone who sets aside a pundion, hamaniach pundion, someone sets aside a pundion, that's 2 isars. And on its account, he ate half. He ate half the Maaser Sheni, and then went to another place where the pundion's depreciating. So we thought he had a whole isar left to eat, but now the Mishnah says, Harehu yotzeh isar ochel alav od plug. He only eats another half, because what's left over is only worth half an isar anymore. And then the Mishnah, so that's the principle. That's the principle. We always go according to market value wherever we are. But this is the incomprehensible bit of the Mishnah. Someone who sets aside an isar should eat on its account 11 parts of the value. Hamaniach isar shel Maaser Sheni ochel alav 11 beisar ve echad mimea beisar, and 1/100th, and 1 in 100 of an isar. And Beit Shammai say in both cases 1/10 part. Nobody really knows what this means. The Rambam says that if you have put aside this money, it becomes whole when you've eaten up to, actually the Rambam says, when you've eaten 10 out of 11 parts of the food. If it's real Maaser Sheni, and 99, sorry, if it's Demai, and 99 out of 100, if it's, sorry, for listening to this edition of the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict. Sorry, I'm sorry about it. That's a stray sound from the recording. That's a reminder that I've got to stop. Beit Shammai says that in order to nullify this money, you have to, in both cases, eat a 10th part, which I think is probably 9/10. You have to eat, so there's only a 10th part left. Beit Hillel says an 11th part, or in the case of Demai, a 10th part, so maybe 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 11. But the core opinion in the Mishnah, the Tanna Kama, the first opinion in the Mishnah, seems to offer either 10 out of 11 parts or maybe 99 out of 100. And you can see, by the way, this feels like all the debates we had about the level at which truma disappears. Remember, we found that if you threw one part of truma into a silo with 100 parts of grain, you could effectively disappear it, in the majority. You could just take one part out again, and you could avoid the whole of the silo becoming truma. So it seems like we're in this sort of debate, and that's the way the Rambam interprets it. But there are many other interpretations too, and none of them are really satisfactory. So with that, I will close, and tomorrow we will get into more issues of naming things. The main issue in the end of this Mishnah is naming things, and how you name them and how explicit you need to be or can be. So we'll come back to that tomorrow.